For those of you that don't know, my name is Benny Benack III. I am a jazz trumpeter and vocalist. I will be today's moderator. Can everybody out there, can all y'all say, Benny Benack? Let me hear it twice. Benny Benack, Benny Benack. All right, I just want to make sure you're all with me here. We're trying to engage today, after all, ladies and gentlemen. Let me give you a little bit of background on how this marvelous assortment of musicians came to be. I am a child of both a jazz saxophonist and a music theater professor. So for me, that was a very interesting intersection of artistic ideals. My influences are as much Louis Armstrong as they are Louis Prima, if you will. And for me, having an aspect of entertainment and a personality was the same as the way that I studied jazz trumpet and studied this music so seriously. It is with this in mind that I approached Jazz at Lincoln Center, and I wanted to talk about the aspects of performing that maybe are not talked about as much in jazz music. And as jazz musicians, we think so much about what to play when it's our turn and not so much what to do when it's not. And in a world where more and more audience members are looking down at their phone before the first tune is even over, I wanted to kind of share some different experiences and tools of the trade on keeping that audience on your side and sharing that experience with all of them. And so, to lend their expertise, we have this very diverse panel of jazz royalty for all of you assembled today. They are all incredible musical voices. They are all incredibly dynamic performers. And it is my pleasure to introduce a bunch of people who all need no introductions, and then we can just get right here to it. First, to my left, the magnificent Russell Hall. Give it up for Russell Hall, ladies and gentlemen. Originally from Kingston, Jamaica, he's grown up musically under the wing here at Jazz and Lincoln Center, performing with Wynton, both in his small groups and with the orchestra across the hall. He has been featured on HBO Young Arts Masterclass. You remember that one with Patrick? You guys were in high school. And along with his sideman work with various jazz legends, he's gone on to be nominated for Emmys, Golden Globes, Grammys for his various collaborations with the likes of John Batiste, Edward Norton, Michael Muenzo and the Shakes, the Emmett Cohen Trio, our good friend Emmett Cohen in the house, and on occasion, the Benny Benack Band. So we're very happy to have Russell Hall with us this afternoon. That's right. Next to Russell, we have Richard Julian, and all I can say is the term singer-songwriter is really only the tip of the iceberg for this Renaissance man, from having toured the world, released solo albums on major record labels, to his more recent endeavor as the co-owner proprietor of Bar Lunatico in Bed-Stuy. Richard is an expert at blending flavors together, be it musically, combining elements of folk, country, and the distinct jazz sounds of New Orleans, as well as the very tasty cocktails that are offered at the bar. And his band, the Little Willies, featuring Norah Jones, has been described as pure gold. We are very happy to have with us today Richard Julian, ladies and gentlemen. Going down the line here, quite simply, we are blessed to be in the presence of one of the absolute queens and icons of American popular music. We're just gonna run through the whole thing. Pardon me, Marilyn, it's quite the resume. When she was first discovered by Steve Allen, led to her award-winning recording career with albums now immortalized in the Smithsonian on the list of best American compositions of the 20th century. She holds the distinction of being the most appeared singer on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson at 76, is that right? 76 times, as well as recently being featured on both Harry Connick Jr.'s daytime television show. She was recently featured on CBS Sunday Morning with a beautiful profile piece by the hilarious and talented Mo Rocca. She just sold out 4 nights at Birdland, celebrating New Year's. And six. Oh, Marilyn, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I got a lot up here. 6 nights. And you know what, folks? We're all very lucky here at Jazz and Lincoln Center because she will be returning for, how many nights is that? I don't want to screw it up.
3 nights, 6 shows.
3 nights, 6 shows. She'll be right across the hall at Dizzy's next month. So you know you can catch her. And the Wall Street Journal says, I love this, she is the only pop song diva working today who can satisfy both the Broadway cabaret crowd and the hip, cool jazz crowd. And as a matter of fact, she is also a beloved and dedicated teacher and vocal coach. So we're very lucky to have with us today sharing all of her knowledge, the marvelous Miss Marilyn Maye, ladies and gentlemen. All right, well, while you're all standing up, we might as well still acknowledge this, no small fry here to Marilyn's left at all.
They're sick of me.
Yeah, they're sick of you, he says. Well, ladies and gentlemen, a little trivia for you. What do Sonny Rollins, Milt Jackson, Freddie Hubbard, Sting, Paul McCartney, George Duke, The Roots, Queen Latifah, Renee Fleming all have in common? The answer is Christian McBride, ladies and gentlemen. Christian McBride. Obviously, as we all know, one of the most respected recorded musicians in this entire art form, known as music, and not only that, he has really become one of the chief ambassadors that we have for this music around the world, spreading the gospel, whether on his Sirius XM radio show, his NPR radio show, one of the many, many ensembles that he leads, Inside Straight, the Christian McBride Trio, whatever the trio is with Emmett and I forget what that one's called.
Tip City.
Oh, Tip City, that's right. And as well as the Christian McBride Big Band, which with I have had a couple opportunities to perform in the trumpet section. Thank you very much, sir. One of the best. How about it, ladies and gentlemen, for a gentleman to put it in terms that as a Philadelphia sports buff he might understand. We have the Wilt Chamberlain, the Dr. J of jazz bass. Give it up for Christian McBride, y'all. Dr. Jazz. Dr. J, there you go. And rounding out this incredible panel here on the end, we have, as we like to call her, another one of our queens here. And, Will Friedwald, who is a noted jazz historian and author, Will Friedwald called her the best young, straight-ahead jazz singer of her generation. That is a very succinct sentence right there. I think that just about sums it up. And the New York Times, as if that wasn't enough, said that she is descendant from Sarah Vaughan, Betty Carter, routed through Diane Reeves, which is fairly good company for this beautiful young lady we have here. And she has been a mainstay at Jazz at Lincoln Center since her arrival here a number of years ago, and also has a very unique perspective as one of the co-teachers of Jazz at Lincoln Center's Jazz for Young People program, and we're going to be picking her brain about that a little bit later today. Now, delighting audiences around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Brianna Thomas. How about it for Brianna Thomas? So, we obviously have a lot of musical knowledge and experience up here on stage, and this time is just going to fly by. I want to make sure we have an opportunity for some of you to speak with these people, but we're just going to get right down to it if that's okay with you folks. So while we're at it, I'll start with Brianna where I just left off. I mentioned the Jazz at Lincoln Center's Jazz for Young People program, and that basically is where you have these small groups go into schools where the band program has been eliminated, or perhaps it's just an after-school program. In some cases, we go to these schools where they've never even seen a live instrument performance before. And you ask the question, what instrument is this? Is this a bass? What instrument is this? It's the drums, it's the piano. And for some of these students, it's the first time that they're seeing these instruments played. So it really is one of the most important gigs that we will ever have. And so my question for you, Brianna, is as a band leader in that program for many years, it's not just about the information we share in the performance, but we're really trying to shape the experience of hearing live music for these kids. So there's so much more that we're responsible for than just giving them information about who Duke Ellington was and who Louis Armstrong was. And we really kind of have this responsibility to show these kids that jazz is a fun music and is something that they can get excited about. And I would ask you, what are some of the tactics that you've learned for engaging a cafeteria full of middle schoolers that are rowdy, that just had lunch? And how do you get that audience to be on your side? And has any of those experiences shaped when you're in audiences like this?
Most certainly. Well, a cafeteria full of hormone-raging teenagers or young children that have either been testing or been in class all day long and are ready to release all of this energy. For me, the answer is to get on their page. You have to get on the person's level in order in expectation of them coming onto your level. So if you greet them where they are, try to take that energy and reroute it and show them how they can use that energy to be a part of something rather than to be disturbing something or be on their lonesome, then the room becomes one big moment that people can share.
That's right. We can clap for that. You can clap for that. We'll take that. As I said, Brianna and I have both had experience in that program, and it's really incredible. Some of the little tactics you noticed when I first came in, just having everybody repeat my name or something like that. Little devices like that they teach you to get a bunch of middle schoolers to pay attention. It's amazing how many of those kind of devices have come full circle, and later on, you know, when you're playing in front of a room full of grown-ups, the same rules kind of apply. And that's something that I feel like I learned a lot.
We're all kids.
That's right.
Every one of us has that place inside of us that is shy, that is rambunctious, that wants to holler and scream. And a lot of times when we get older, we learn to just fall in line and suppress those things. But part of being in a musical experience is being able to let the sound follow your feeling and express yourself as you go. And I think that that's one of the biggest things about the Jazz for Young People program. These kids, a lot of them haven't experienced music. Maybe some of them have parents or uncles or people in their family who play an instrument, but to experience a live concert, there's a difference between watching it on YouTube or listening to a CD and being in that moment with those people. You become a part of it. So to show them that jazz is not an outdated or old music, it belongs to them, and it is now, is what that program is doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, since we're on the topic of kids, I thought we could move along to a gentleman that recently put on a show across the hallway with the Rainbow Kids. That's the name of your ensemble, right, Russell?
Yes, it is.
That's right. And so, Russell, you started off honing your craft, obviously, as a bassist, which, as we know, is the ultimate supportive instrument in a band. And now that you are releasing your own music, you just put out an album a number of weeks ago. You have this very, multidisciplinary, multifunctional show that you presented in Dizzy's just a couple days ago. Do you totally assume a different mindset as a band leader and singer than you do when you are a bassist in someone else's band? Is there anything in those two worlds that overlaps?
Well, I always kind of see the bass and the band leader as kind of the same function. They are a curator or a facilitator of music, of art, of something that people want to engage with. It's not about the ego, it's about what is being created. And I think that I use the same mentality that if I was, playing a sideman gig at some dive bar in Queens on a Tuesday in November, in the snow, that I would if I was playing Carnegie Hall. Maximum music, minimum ego. And I think that I've been very blessed to, be around some of the most selfless musicians and some of the most engaging people in the world. The first person that kind of comes to mind is the late but great Mr. Roy Hargrove.
Right.
And it didn't matter if he was playing New Morning and the lights were going and people were chanting, or anything, or if it was just at Smalls and the piano player didn't know, the turnaround to Lady Bird, and he was always in service of the music. And part of the concept of my ensemble and ensembles that I play with like-minded people such as, Mr. Cohen and Moenzo and the Shakes and all these other ensembles is that we are servants of the greater good, and the greater good manifests itself into music, and we are just here as mediums. I'm just a medium. If I'm talking and reciting Samuel Beckett on the stage, or if I'm just trying to work my way through Woody and You, I think it's all just functioning as a medium. And whatever comes out is what's supposed to come out. Actually, I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't mention probably as one of my friends rightfully said, the grandfather of humanity, Louis Daniel Armstrong. And what he did, you know, you would never separate his trumpet and his voice from one another. It's the same thing. It doesn't matter if he's playing in King Oliver's band or if he's playing with Mahalia Jackson at Newport, which is probably one of the greatest videos of all time. He is Louis Daniel Armstrong, and he is the grandfather of humanity. And if you have that mindset in your band, or at the dive bar in November 2nd in Queens in the middle of the snow, then I think people will receive it very well.
I think that's, yes, Russell, yes. I think that's a very good point when you talk about some of the legends of this music and the way that they are received. We think of Louis Armstrong or Dizzy Gillespie, two gentlemen who are big, obviously, heroes and influences of mine. And, you know, their personality and the way that they communicated with audiences and people in person and in recordings was translated, and they're as brilliant, you know, have done as much for the language and advancement of the history of the trumpet in jazz music as any other artist, and they were the absolute virtuosic, you know, total command of their craft and their instrument, but they also were not afraid or, you know, concerned with, you know, letting themselves laugh on stage or inviting audience to kind of be a part of that or let the humor come into the music. And, you know, like Russell said, if Louis Armstrong is sort of this, you know, beacon from which the top of the tree that we're all kind of growing and offshooting from, you know, what better example of, you know, total artistry mixed with total presentation do we have other than that? So, you know, you could just like you were talking about with your jam session etiquette talk that you had yesterday, you could just say Roy Hargrove and put the mic down.
Yeah.
You know, we could do this talk and we could kind of just say, well, you know, Louis Armstrong, and you know, we could just all go home a little bit early. But of course, we have some more amazing people up here to speak their mind. So while we're in the rhythm section, while we're dealing with the bass, we might as well make our way to another bassist here, and something that maybe you could speak to, Christian, obviously as someone that has worked so closely with the masters of this music, you know, as a young sideman. Of course, we don't have to go through all the names. We can go through some of them: Freddie Hubbard, Milt Jackson, George Duke, Hank Jones, Ray Brown, Roy Haynes, Chick Corea, et cetera, et cetera. In your time spent with those masters, were there ever any conversations, or was there anything that they imparted on you about the presentation of the music, or conversations about how it would be, you know, shared with the audiences, or were they really just focused on the music presentation?
I don't think any of those people you named were focused strictly on the music. As you mentioned, being a bass player, we are the ultimate support instrument. So I learned early that you always take your cues from the band leader. I often notice that when we talk about jazz and what it means, the word individuality tends to come up a lot. But sometimes in expressing that individuality, you can wind up not being a team player. So what that means is that if I'm playing in Freddie Hubbard's band, yes, I'm an individual. I don't have to dress like one also, right? I follow the band leader. If Freddie Hubbard's wearing a suit, I'm thinking, oh, I guess I should wear a suit, you know? If Milt Jackson's wearing a suit, I'm thinking, I guess I should wear a suit. But if I'm playing with a band leader who's not wearing a suit, if it's his band or her band, I'll take their cue from them. It's like, okay, well, this might not be a gig where I need to wear a suit. Let me be a part of the team, you know? So all of those people you named, you take Chick Corea, like, versus someone like a Hank Jones. I don't think I've ever seen Chick Corea in a suit, right? But he always communicates with the audience. He's a wonderful, wonderful communicator with the audience. He's a master at bringing the audience in. Whereas somebody like Hank Jones, the man was suited up all the time, even when he was traveling, you know. He got on an airplane with a suit, you know. He always carried an extra suit in his carry-on luggage, you know. And I learned that lesson the hard. I didn't quite figure out why that was until I played a gig with Roy Haynes, who was the ultimate style counselor, right? There's nobody in the world hipper than Roy Haynes, right? I'm playing a gig with Roy up in Burlington, Vermont, and my luggage didn't show up. and I had on this ratty sweatsuit, like an Adidas sweatsuit, and there's Roy with his boots, and his little hip flowing shirt, and I'm on stage with this Adidas tracksuit, and I felt so stupid. And all of a sudden, I started thinking of Hank. I was like, yeah, I should have prepared for that. And one of my peers, the only one of my peers I've ever seen do that is Antonio Hart. We went to Europe with Roy Haynes once, and my man was suited up on the plane. And I said, man, what you doing? And he's like, you never know. You never know. And so I've learned that all of these great band leaders, even if they don't suit up, there's something that they do that lets us know that they are engaged with the audience, whether it's how you look, whether it's how you speak, just how you carry yourself on stage. You don't necessarily have to be suited up all the time to be able to communicate with the audience, but you do have to acknowledge that people paid money to see you play, and they came there to get some sort of inspiration, and you can't take that for granted. And Chick Corea also mentions a lot about Miles Davis, because myth has always told us that, Miles didn't care about the audience. He always had his back to the audience. He never announced anything to the audience. So therefore, we interpret that as he didn't care about the audience. And Chick, if I may quote him directly, he said, Miles Davis was the greatest dramatic actor in the history of jazz. He said Miles was acutely aware of what the audience was paying attention to. That's one of the reasons why he started leaving the stage, because he hated the fact that Coltrane or Cannonball or whoever it was would be taking a solo, and the audience would still be looking at him. Like, what's Miles thinking? While Coltrane is playing, Miles like, look, I'm leaving, right? And of course, he was right, because the conversation then became, why did Miles leave? Right? And Miles like, dang, y'all, So he was very aware of his audience. So I take my cues from the band leader. You know what I mean? You gotta pay attention to the audience and be a team player.
Thank you very much, Christian. While we've got you, you talk about band leaders, and it's widely known you have such an affinity for the godfather of soul, Mr. James Brown. As a matter of fact, for those of you that have seen Christian perform, even when the big band has been over here in Dizzy's, he even enlists Mr. Brown's himself, cape-wielding MC Danny Ray, to introduce you with the band. And as we know, the godfather of the soul is one of the most electrifying entertainers in the history of American music. And my question to you is, how have you harnessed some of your inspiration for him and the way he commands the stage? If any, is there any of that James Brown flavor in Inside Straight or New John or Tip City?
Not in any of those smaller groups, but I really love playing with the big band because I get to encompass everything I love about music in that band. I get to be an orchestrator, I get to be an arranger, I get to be a bassist. There's a small group inside the big band. I get to be a showman. All that kind of stuff is all in one band. And when I first started my big band, when James Brown died, Danny Ray is, for anybody who ever saw James Brown, Danny Ray was almost as much an important part of the James Brown show as James Brown himself. So I thought, I can't imagine too many people are going to hire Danny Ray. So let me call him up and see if he'll come on the road with me. And so to hear him call my name, that was trippy, man. And I've always been a fan of showmanship, because like many of us, certainly from a certain generation, I wasn't raised on jazz. I was raised on R&B and pop and gospel music. So every time I would see these people perform, there was a high level of showmanship in these performances. And I just couldn't understand why I didn't see much of that in jazz. The music was killing. The music was absolutely killing. But if you could draw a parallel, it's like bringing someone a gourmet dinner on a dirty or broken plate. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, yes, the food is great, but the presentation is important as well. You know what I mean? So when I started my big band, I said, I got to get it in.
That's right. Well, we think you did that very well, I can say sitting back there in the trumpet section a couple times. I think we accomplished that. Thank you, man. Well, while we were on the subject of, as you mentioned, calling Miles Davis a dramatic actor, and keeping in mind, that we as musicians, when we are on stage, if you are on stage, you are portraying a role in some way, shape, or form. We are actors in as much that we're just trying to communicate an emotion or a feeling of a song. And because we have one of the greatest interpreters of song on stage here, I would like to speak to the immortal Marilyn Maye here now. And that's right. Now, Marilyn, when I hear you sing and I hear you interpret the standards and these great American songbook melodies, to me you are, of course, the epitome of what it is to be a jazz singer and jazz phrasing and everything that goes into that. But you are someone that, while achieving immortality in the jazz world, also is equally comfortable in the cabaret world. And the triumphant return for you in New York, of course, for those of you that don't know, at the Metropolitan Room in 2006, that was, they sort of say, the rediscovery of Marilyn Maye, at least in the way that she has been selling out rooms around New York City ever since that moment. And, every award that you could possibly have, from Broadway world, from cabaret world, Marilyn, of course, has won all of them. And I would say in a musical form in cabaret that is often heavily kind of tied into stage patter and, crafting a story between the songs. And we think of cabaret and you think of some of these acts where the performers really are doing a lot of talking, a lot of kind of introspective things in between songs. You prefer to let the music speak for itself. And what is your thinking behind that less is more patter, chit-chat approach, and when you decide to talk to the audience?
Well, I love to talk, there's no doubt about that. And, but I've always felt that, for me, the audience is the star. I'm not really the star. You're the star. You came to hear me. You gave up your time, your money, your energy to come and hear me. And so I really honor the fact that you're there. And thank goodness, because how could we work if we didn't have an audience, So I'm grateful for that. As far as conversation is concerned, you're right. I'm very fortunate that I get a lyric, that I have these wonderful stories to tell that people wrote, and sometimes I write my own lyrics here and there, which I'm criticized for, except that I just saw Moulin Rouge, and there's a lot of lyrics there. But just to convey the story, I'm very fortunate to get to do that. And I always believe, just my belief, right or wrong, that I sing to the audience, not for them. And
yeah, could you explain that? For those of you that don't know, that is really sort of Marilyn's motto.
We don't talk to each other above our heads. When we're in conversation, we're looking at each other, aren't we? So the song to me is conversation. And I want to look at you. I want to look at you and convey it as much as I possibly can. There's a gap between the stage and you. And I want you to really hear the lyric. And if I don't live it, if I'm thinking about what am I going to buy tomorrow at the store or whatever, I have to think that lyric. I always tell people that I work with, every time you sing a song, it should be the first time you ever said those words. If you can keep that freshness in the song and really live that lyric every time you do it, I think then you, the audience, get it. I think that's as I say, right or wrong. I've not been honored. I've never won a Grammy. I've been nominated with Herman's Hermits and the Birds, but I've never won. So no. So it's no award to do that. It's my job. It's not really a reward. The reward is when you show up to hear me. And I so believe that. And I've sung all my life. There was never a time when I wasn't working before 2006. I worked in the Midwest and Texas and all kinds of funny clubs. They're called nightclubs, really, not cabarets. And even though I recorded cabaret, I hate that word when they're still, to me, in my old school thinking, they're nightclubs. and it's a wonderful thing to get to gather some people that really want to hear the music, and you just need to be true to the music. Jazz, of course, I'm from Kansas City, and that's a great place for jazz, although there's not many clubs open in Kansas City now. Isn't that interesting? That's why this establishment is such a joy in my life, because New York and this particular place is featuring jazz. It's so wonderful that you have this to grab onto and to hear. But the whole thing about jazz improvisation, there's a certain, you can improvise. Sometimes they write it right. Sometimes what they said, note-wise, is terrific. So why do I need to do an optional note? But then I really love to do my own endings and my own arrangements and that kind of thing. It's really fun to tamper with what they wrote and put your own stamp on it. So I'm very fortunate that I have this way of conveying my feelings and my thoughts and these wonderful lyrics that I have to work with. I'm fortunate in that respect.
Marilyn Maye, ladies and gentlemen, that's right. And while we're discussing lyrics and we're speaking to those of us that are singers on the stage, for you, Brianna, piggybacking off that a little bit, you have such a reputation, I think, for, among the many talents and different colors and timbres that you can get to with your voice, you're known as one of the best storytellers of the blues, right? And the soulful is probably the first adjective that I think of when I'm thinking of hearing you sing. And I know that, what is it you think about the blues that resonates with audiences so easily? In any club, any style of music, if you get to a blues, for whatever reason, it seems like that is very easy for an audience to kind of grab a hold of. And how do you, Brianna Thomas, convey that same emotional connection with an audience when you are singing more nuanced and dense, musical forms and other compositions from jazz composers?
Well, the blues is everybody's story. If you've been alive long enough to lose anything like a pacifier, a blanket, or a friend, then you know what losing something means. And everybody understands that story on their own level. And the blues, fortunately, is at the core of all of this music that we're talking about. It's at the very center of it. So telling a story, there's call and response in the blues. You say a line, my man don't love me, he treats me awfully mean. My man don't love me, you state it again, he treats me awfully mean. And then you tell what you think or how you feel about it, or say what you want to say. He's the meanest man that I've ever seen. And, the story, every song, whether it's a blues that people sometimes think of as simple, but it's really not because of all the space. There's enough space to get lost in or to do too much in. You have to be able to tell the truth and stand in it. And that's at the core of this music. So whether you're singing a blues or you're singing a ballad or you're singing something you wrote, you have to find the story in the song. And I love what you said, that the lyrics need to be new and you need to be fresh with them every time. You have to find the truth in the song and sing it. And my truth may be that my man don't love me and he treats me mean. Maybe somebody else's truth is that their job don't love them and they treat them mean, but it's still the same truth and it comes from the same place. So if you sing the song out of a definite truth within yourself, you allow other people to experience it and find their own truth, because everybody in the audience has a story.
That's right, Brianna Thomas. And I can tell you, I've been in some of those cafeterias where Brianna has those rowdy middle schoolers, and nobody gets them on her side like she does. So she has an ability to communicate with these audiences regardless of age and, kind of transmit those feelings, those stories to every audience. And while we're talking about the blues, we should hear from another one of our esteemed panelist members, because Richard here is very well steeped in many musical forms, the blues and Americano, country western, country music, folk, you name it. Certainly, of course, you spent some time as well in New Orleans, and anyone that has been there for 2 minutes, you know, you get a sense of that musical spirit and that musical energy that has found its way into some of your music. And you have a very unique distinction on this panel, because not only are you someone that has traveled the world and been on stages of all sizes and been in front of audiences, but also with Bar Lunatico in Bed-Stuy, the bar and music venue that you curate and you're a co-owner for, you're on the other side of that as well. So the music that Richard curates and books at this club is as varied and as eclectic as you could find anywhere in New York City, and you're just as likely to hear contemporary, avant-garde jazz as you are someone from New Orleans, you know, a blues artist, country folk artist. I mean, you know, it really, the room is kind of a home to so many different musical styles. And I was just wondering if you notice with the audiences at your establishment, you know, is there any difference in, you know, the interaction that they have with artists when you have a rock band, or when you have a blues artist, or when your band is performing there, or there's, you know, contemporary jazz? Is there anything, you know, that you see with the community in your venue that is consistent?
Well, I think that some music demands more intensity from an audience, but for the most part, I don't think it's a style of music that would, you know, make an audience behave. It's the performer and the people doing it. Brianna plays out at my place, and I feel like everything Brianna said on the first question you asked her is very indicative of how I feel about performing and what I hope performers will do, you know, when they come in. And she's talking about it with fifth graders, but what she's saying is that you're trying to unify the room, basically. And I think you said you want to meet people where they are. And that's really what you want to do. You just want to try to get everybody, you know, in the room focused on the same thing. And in her case, she can just sing a melody straight, you know, or tell a story like that, but also improvise with the band and crank up the volume and just, you know, I don't know, chop you down like a tree. But I've seen that happen a lot of times. But yeah, some guys will, you know, one thing that really bothered me, because we have a room that, when I lived in New Orleans, I liked the clubs that had a lot of different people in the audience. It wasn't just music aficionados. And, you know, somebody, like you'd have the welder out there, you know, all these people. And in New Orleans, there's a culture of music where everybody participates in the music. So we wanted to open up a spot like that. And so every night before the music, I get out in front of the crowd and I kind of explain to people what we expect from them in terms of how to behave. You know, I talk to the crowd, I say, please keep the, you know, volume of conversation down so the music can thrive. And I'm amazed sometimes that I'll go out and do that and I feel like I've done my job and the audience is just waiting for something. And then, you know, here and there'll be some people, some musicians that'll get up and they just blow it, you know, they have that thing just right there, and maybe they, you know, I don't know what they do. Maybe they start joking with the band members on stage, or they look like they're out doing their laundry or something. They didn't dress right for the gig, or, you know, stuff like that. There's some of that, and this can happen with accomplished musicians, you know, people who can really play, but they just they haven't paid attention to that side of things, and it's so important to. This guy here, I just met Russell. What's that? They always complain. That's the thing. They're always going to complain. But I just met Russell tonight. I don't even know Russell, and he knew of my club, and he said, "Hey man, we got to talk." And like, he's already booked just because he looks great. You know what I mean? Like, this night is going to go good. You know, but I'm really serious. It's like how you carry yourself is, you know, I already know it's going to go well. I already know it. You know, I mean, I'm going to check it out. We'll talk about it, but like, you know.
Man, I learned from the best, man. I'd be remiss if I didn't say, you know, I'm from Kingston, Jamaica, and there's not really any jazz happening in Kingston. There's barely any reggae happening in Kingston, believe it or not. And as a young youth, as we would say where I'm from, at 14 years old, I learned from the best. And it's like it's mesmerizing, and I don't know where I am right now, but I would not be where I am right now if it wasn't for this man, Christian McBride, sitting right here. And something needs to be said, because you think of when you get exposed to this, our music, as Dizzy Gillespie would say, our music. You seek out the people, you seek out the kindred spirits, you seek out somebody that is teaching you about yourself. And as a young brother, the first video I ever saw this man, he was playing and he was wearing this shirt. It looked like a Versace shirt.
Fake Versace shirt.
But and they're playing the Turnaround by Ornette Coleman, and it's Pat Metheny and Brian Blade. I remember it like it was yesterday, and this is the first time I had a mouth full of braces, spaces and braces, and rubber bands. And I'm watching this, and this song is out too. It's Ornette Coleman's music, and he's playing it, and my face is like this on the screen, because seeing somebody that's just comfortable being themselves.
Yes.
And in their own skin, but at the same time is relating to you, because it's like there's color in the way he's playing. You can hear the whole history of the music in the stuff he's playing, and he's developing thematic material in the way he's playing. Even though the song, they're taking it out and about and around and down and back to town and everything else in between, and then I never forget going to the Village Vanguard at 15 years old. I never forget, man. And going down to the Vanguard and seeing him perform for the first time live. And it was like, this music, we have so many heralds in this music that are changing the music, and are changing the way that we foresee it. People that are comfortable being themselves. Seeing the Queen, the Empress Queen, Miss Marilyn Maye, who you should give another round of applause for. And seeing her, I never forget seeing her at the gala of jazz at Lincoln Center, and the whole room erupting. The ceiling almost fell down. It was so loud in there, and the effortless mastery of Fats Waller's music, and the fact that Fats Waller was all about stage presence, all about engagement. He was the first music video star. And I'm just meeting Richard, but we're kindred spirits. We got our boots on, so like we have a vibe, and even more hands-on, because I know we were running out of time. Even more hands-on. Miss Brianna Thomas and I just got off a 2-month tour, and when I tell you I have not learned how to engage an audience on that level every single night. Every performance, sometimes 3 performances a day, from anybody from 100 to 1 year old in the audience. Every time she opened her mouth to sing, Squeeze Me. Again, Fats Waller, one of the greatest entertainers in the history of humanity. Every time, she was just... And it's because I think the key element here is, in being an individual, you're being yourself. And in being yourself, you are finding common ground with other people.
That's right. Thank you, Russell. And to mention, your hero again, someone that has meant so much to this music. It would be merely enough if Christian was just one of the most breathtaking and virtuosic people to ever play his instrument. I said Christian, actually. I said Christian. Yeah. Okay. No, I know. Right. Although, you up there too, man. You sound pretty good too. I mean, really, you're getting, No, I of course it would merely that puts you in the Hall of Fame just by virtue of his musicianship alone. But I think the other thing that has made you such an important figure to this music, and as I said, really an ambassador, is the same level of virtuosity that you have musically, you also have in the ease with which you're able to communicate with people. And that is so clear. I remember here, speaking of Roy Hargrove, at the memorial that we had during the Congress, and you were tasked with, having to speak on this, this man that was your brother, and you were so, spoke so eloquently and thoughtfully, and there was humor when there needed to be humor, and there was gravity when there needed to be gravity. And of course, we mentioned the radio shows that you host, and, showmanship or affability or, ability that you have to put an audience at ease and to communicate with people. And, you talk about stage presence, that's just something that I think Christian McBride, came out of the womb being Christian McBride in that way. I really believe that. But for those of us, as we're here at the Jazz Congress and, we're surrounded by jazz musicians and concert promoters and club owners and people that book this, and there's so much conversation and networking going on in these things, I know it can be difficult for a lot of musicians who, as I said, we spend so much time being taught and learning about what notes to play on stage and what songs to learn. And there are absolutely musicians, I know, incredibly talented musicians and performers that have done their homework, that have learned the craft of this music, that have honored the tradition in that way. But they are not, it is a struggle for them to be as easygoing and charismatic and, comfortable communicating with an audience on stage. And, there's jazz universities, there's schools. We've all worked with older band leaders where you mentioned you take the cues from band leaders, and it's easy to kind of, not know a song on a jam session and go home and learn the song the next time. It's easy to screw up the changes on one tune to go learn it. But what advice would you have for, musicians and younger people that it's not second nature to them to, to speak that way and be comfortable like that? Is that a skill that can be honed? Can stage presence be learned?
I mentioned individuality earlier, and I think part of really being a true individual is really understanding who you are and embracing that. Once you discover who you are and you're okay with that, I think most people can see that and they go, oh, that's who they are, as opposed to sort of, well, let me work on becoming what I think I need to be on stage to engage with the audience. I think people can see and feel right through that. Again, this is what made Miles Davis such a great dramatic actor, because he knew who he was and he was cool with that, as opposed to somebody who was a huge inspiration for me, almost as much as James Brown, and that's Julian Cannonball Adderley. When I was growing up really getting into jazz, I was turned on by Cannonball's commentary as much as the music. To hear him speak to the audience was like, oh my gosh, he was like the greatest, communicator on stage ever. And a fact, I tweeted about this a couple of weeks ago. Not a lot of people outside of Los Angeles know this. For one season in 1972, Cannonball Adderley hosted a talk show called 90 Minutes with Cannonball Adderley. And it makes perfect sense, you know what I mean? So listening to people like Cannonball Adderley, paying close attention to people like Marilyn McBride. When I played on piano jazz, it was such a thrill for me, but I was also studying her. How does she engage with her guests? Watching people like Marilyn Maye. One of the most embarrassing moments of my life was when we did a double bill at Birdland, and I remember thinking, I shouldn't be on this gig. This should be like Marilyn Maye's group with me watching, So like every time we would have to switch, I'd be like, man, this is royalty here. I shouldn't be here. But like learning so much from this amazing legend and people like her. And I have to admit, I actually studied Johnny Carson a lot too, because I think he's, he was a brilliant, you talk about the perfect balance of comedy and gravity, being quick on his feet. Knowing when to get a one-liner in there, knowing when to be serious. I remember him interviewing, you would watch him interview somebody like Robin Williams, and then you watch him interview somebody like Gore Vidal or Norman Mailer. Or what's my man? He did the Garrison from Louisiana. Did the
Garrison Keillor, Prairie Home.
From New Orleans, Jim Garrison did the Kennedy. Jim Garrison, yeah, and like watching Johnny Carson converse with him using legal terms, right? I'm like, man, Carson's the cat. I need to check that out, right? So mixing James Brown, Johnny Carson, Cannonball Adderley, Mary McPartland, and Flip Wilson.
Put that all in the stew.
That's all me.
What
But
you
that,
get.
that was all sort of, that's what got me. That was natural to me. I know to some other people, being quiet, being stealth, that's what works for them. So to answer your question, can that be developed? The development is knowing who you are and developing that. Yeah. And then that's how you can communicate with your audience.
And I think it is an interesting point. Just, it sounded like to me as you were saying that you had studied Johnny Carson, or when you were on Marion McPartland and you were observing and listening to her. To me, that almost sounds like, you know, watching Johnny Carson and the way he interacts with his guests, that's almost a form of transcribing, you know? It's almost like in the same way that as musicians, we transcribe different solos to try and absorb different, you know, inspiration and information from those solos. When you're observing people that, you know, have a certain presence or are comfortable speaking in these ways, you're transcribing in the same way. So if we do that musically, what's to say we cannot study people in that same way and you know, come up with whatever stew of influences makes sense for you? And like Christian said, I think the bottom line always comes back to kind of being yourself and being comfortable in that.
Johnny was so in the moment, always in the moment, and comfortable. There was no phony persona about him, and that's what I think is so, you just have to be you, whatever you are, when you're in a conversation like this, or when you walk on stage. It's the same thing. It's just be yourself, no phony. He would, you know, there would be a list of questions that they would ask you, and, you know, what do you want to talk about? And there would be the list of questions. And after the first question, the questions were put aside. He listened to what you said. He listened to what you said, and developed on that, you know. And that's what you do. You when you walk on stage, you just be yourself. You don't have to be showbiz. You can just be comfortable, and I know that's hard to do, but not really. If you just relax, everybody's on your side. They're all there to love you. They don't want to judge you. They've paid their money. Hey, listen, I want to love them. You know, stories. You asked me about stories. Yes. Conversation. I think I just saw a wonderful actress a few nights ago who has incredible stories about the movies she's done, and Kathleen Turner, and just incredible stories. And it was mostly an active conversation more than singing, because she's a great actress, and I love that idea. There's another performer that always works the Carlisle, and he talks about all these fun stories and showbiz people, and that's if you have a great story, I do believe that it always has to have a payoff. I worked with a lot of comedians, Shecky Green and Alan King, and those wonderful people that they're comedians. But I think for entertainment, if you have a story, it ought to have a payoff, some kind of little cute joke at the end, rather than some piece of information. If you want information, let's have dinner.
All right. There you go, folks. Well, I think...
It's about music.
That's right. That's right. Well, I think, we have more questions, and honestly, when you have a group of panelists like this, we could probably all sit here and be captivated all night long talking. But as I see here, we do have just about 10 minutes left, and so I wanted to make sure, since we are here engaging our audience, I wanted to engage our audience and see if there's anybody out here that has any questions about that engagement or stage presence with this various panel. And I would encourage you, because the people that we have assembled here today are the incredible forces that they are, and also the incredibly busy forces that they are. I feel like everybody, as soon as we get out of stage, is all going to be darting off to the next gig and the next obligation. But I assure you, all of these people are as warm and welcoming on stage as they are off stage, and I'm sure could make themselves available to you if you have anything, piercing questions in your mind, because we do only have, a short time here together. So with this last little bit, if there is anybody that has any particular questions for these masters, and before I open it up, I wanted to toss the floor over to another one of our brothers here. We were talking about Russell has just recently been on a tour with Brianna and has performed with me many times, and a gentleman here in the room that might have the most connectivity between all of us on stage, because Russell plays in his band, he plays in Christian's band, he's played with Brianna, he's a musical brother of mine, and that's another gentleman here in the house by the name of Emmett Cohen, who's a good friend of all of ours. Emmett, are you out there somewhere hanging out? I wanted to give him an opportunity to speak on a little bit with his trio, the experiences that he has with Russell. What are some of the things that, he's like, no, forget it. Well, I will just say, having seen his band perform a number of times, like almost 10 years ago when Russell was 18 years old with Evan Sherman over there in Dizzy's, and, seeing the way that piano trio presentation was, how that has changed over the years, and really with you seeing the way your musical evolution has happened over the last decade or so. You still had the braces when I met you as well, and we're talking about your ensemble, the Rainbow Kids, and also I wanted to mention very formative years spent in Disney's at the late night with Michael Mwenso, who has been a big mentor of yours. And you play with Michael Mwenso and the Shakes. Yeah, give it up for Mwenso and the Shakes, absolutely. They've graced this stage many times. And that ensemble particularly, getting back to, also with Richard's background, where you have all of these wide, varied musical influences all coming together. And, the way that Emmett's trio also interacts with the audience, having everyone in the band do a little barbershop trio, Don't Blame Me, and sing a little bit, and just to kind of talk about what the mindset is when you're out there with the Shakes and you're playing a folk music festival versus, when you're in Dizzy's and you're playing a jazz club, what are some of those different experiences like?
Wow, that's a lot. But, I'm going to do the best I can. First and foremost, I will say I've had the best teachers, everyone from, and different forms of stage presence, because I think that's also another thing, too, to kind of go in tandem with what all of these masters have just said. It's all about being yourself. And, I also think of someone like the, Professor Sir Ron of Carter. And he was my teacher at the Juilliard School, and he's somebody that I think of his stage presence too, because he doesn't say much, but then when he gets on the mic, he might make a little, joke about, here's a song about April 14th, loose change. Or he'll make some little, joke, and it's him. It's very him, even though it's not, hey, I'm Ron Carter, nice to meet you, It's very much who he is. And then Ray Brown is very much who he is. He might just start clapping on Squatty Roo, and then you jumping out your seat and your coattails flapping. And I think as young musicians, as I'm definitely the youngest person on stage, I am constantly learning from my mentors, whether it's Miss McBride, and I consider Brianna to be a mentor because I was behind her every night, and every night she opened her mouth to sing, everybody would jump out their seats like it was on fire. And seeing Miss Marilyn Maye, and now just meeting him for the first time and knowing how connected to New Orleans he is, and being in New Orleans, everybody is just unafraid to be themselves. And I think that's the key, is the fearlessness. It's like when I play with Mwenso and the Shakes, there's a fearlessness that he has, and it is because of the influence of James Brown. It is because of the influence of Wynton Marsalis. It's because of all these different influences that he is fearless. He'll start dancing and will break out into an African rhythm, and he'll start dancing and levitating on stage. Michaela Marina Lerman, she'll start levitating on stage, tap dancing. Or Vuyo Satashi will just hark the herald angels and scream out this angelic voice out of the heavens. It's because this is how these people are. Our music is comprised of some of the richest personalities, and jazz will never die because it is comprised of the richest personalities, the most multifaceted people that the world has ever known. And I think probably the greatest example of this is Mr. Edward Kennedy Duke Ellington. You could give a round of applause for him. And just that level of, it's that level of fearlessness. If you listen to how he speaks of his Afro-Eurasian eclipse and how he will describe the kangaroo and the didgeridoo. And you're like, who is this? Who is doing this? This is insane. He's just doing it, you know, and it's Duke Ellington. This same person that's writing Black, Brown, and Beige and doing all this stuff is because he is unafraid to be himself. He's unafraid to speak on these things.
I think that is something that we almost heard from everyone on this line in a different way, shape, or form. That idea of not being afraid to be themselves. And I think if there was one nugget that we could, you know, send you all home with here from this workshop or this discussion, certainly, is the idea that to kind of possess stage presence doesn't mean that everybody has to be up on stage saying, hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you all so much for coming. You know, that kind of idea. But you heard from all of these different various voices here that all kind of circling around the same thing, that you really want to just get to the root of being yourself, and whatever that means to you, as Christian said, as Brianna said, as everybody said, you know, that you just have to try and be comfortable communicating the most, you know, humbly and you know, as yourself as you can, and an audience will pick up on that.
I think what Miss Maye was saying is very important in terms of not coming on stage and being spooked out by being on stage. There is a divide, even in this room. We're level with you, but there's a divide between us. But you must remember, the stage is a part of the room. And sometimes when I've been afraid to come on stage, or I like to walk into a space. We used to do this during sound check on tour, and I learned walking into the space and walking out into the room and being out there and feeling the entire space out can make this less scary. And because then you know that it's a part of the room and you are just in one giant moment with people. And being yourself, you know, audience members can tell when you're not telling the truth on the blues or any song. You know, they want to come, and we all want to come and experience someone showing us a raw truth of a moment. I don't want to watch somebody be uncomfortable on stage. I want someone to take me on a journey that is all about, let's just chill, and this is my living room, come on in. You know, those are when you make the most real moments happen with people that live on past that moment.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are nearly past our moment here as we're on stage, but I want to thank all of you for lending us your time and your ears here. We have another incredible panel that will be in here momentarily, and if there are any parting words from our esteemed panelists here, speak now or forever hold your peace. But before that, I would like one more time, please acknowledge the brilliance of Brianna Thomas on the voice, Mr. Christian McBride, the marvelous Marilyn Maye, Richard Julian, Russell Hall, and yours truly, Benny Benack III. Thank you all so much for making this a part of your Jazz Congress, and I'm sure we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.